Hi guys, today for the Jones Notes, we're going to do Unit 5, Lesson 4, which is genetics. Reminder, please make sure you guys pause the video if you guys need to catch up, but we need to write everything, and you guys are going to take pictures of it and either send them through Remind or through email. So let's go ahead and get started. So we are going to talk about heredity. Okay, heredity is a vocab term. So I'm going to underline it in my highlighter. Okay, heredity is when you inherit something, like from your parents. So it's the passing of traits. Traits meaning the color of your eyes, how tall or short you are. So the traits to the offspring. Offspring is a scientific word that means basically like the babies or the children. So I'm going to put that in parentheses so that we can remember that. So it means like babies. So heredity is the passing of traits. So let's say that your dad is super, super tall and now you're super, super tall, or it could be the other way about being short. Those are traits that you guys have. So traits like freckles, if your hairline has a widow's peak, or if it's a straight line. So things like that. So when I'm talking about heredity and traits, that's what I mean. So there's this man. His name is Gregor Mendel, okay? And he is kind of like the father of genetics. Now, there's a ton of scientists that have more recently studied genetics that have learned even more. So he's not the only one, but he's one of the very first, so that's why we call him the father of genetics. He studied pea plants. Okay, he studied the colors, how many peas are in a pod, if they're wrinkly peas or if they're smooth peas. So he studied pea plants, and more specifically the pea pods. Okay, he noticed that some of the traits were carried to the new pea pods, but sometimes they weren't. So when he basically was trying to multiply the pea plants, he would kind of mix different ones to see what happened. So when he studied the pea plants, he came up with these two new terms that you guys now know, called dominant, okay, and recessive. Okay, these are two really important things. So these are also vocab, so I'm going to underline them. So dominant and recessive. So dominant is the allele. Think of an allele as like it's a letter, but it means a certain trait. So it is an allele that is fully expressed, okay, or seen. So that's the one. So if you think of like an animal that is more dominant, okay, what that means is that it kind of overpowers the other animals. So dominant means that it overshadows it. Where recessive is the allele that is typically masked or hidden because it's overpowered by the dominant. Now, if you get two recessive traits, then you'll see the recessive trait because there's no dominant trait to overpower it. Okay, so that's what dominant and recessive mean. Okay. Alrighty. So I'm gonna go over this word allele. Okay, so I'm gonna underline allele. Okay, allele is a very funny kind of word, but it means the letter. Okay, so you guys are going to see this, especially when we get to Punnett squares and throughout this lesson. Allele means letter, and what happens is you get one allele from your mother and one allele from your father for each trait. Okay, so maybe your mom has freckles and your dad doesn't, or maybe they both have freckles, or maybe neither of them have freckles. So it just depends. But you get one allele from mom and one allele from dad. Okay, so let's say from your mom, let's say she's short, so let's say it's a lowercase t, and your dad is tall, so it's a capital T. Okay, so you get one allele from mom, one allele from dad, which means that you could have big T, little t. Now, what's interesting about this is if you have a capital T, that equals dominant, where a lowercase equals recessive. Okay, so here you'd be getting a dominant and a recessive trait, but the dominant would show over top of the recessives, meaning that you would be tall. Now, when you get these two letters together, okay, that is called a genotype. And I know this is a lot of new words, so I'm hoping that this is making sense to you guys. So a genotype means that the letters that are given, okay, the alleles. So when I say what's your genotype for height, you would say big T, little t, or big T, or little t, little t. So remembering that you get one from mom and one from dad, so you're going to have two for each thing, okay? But some of your traits might be dominant, and some of your traits might be recessive. So let's go ahead and practice this real quick. So when I say genotype, it means the letters, okay? The actual genes that you are getting from your parents. When I say what is your phenotype, that means what am I actually going to see? What is the actual physical trait, okay? So it's the physical trait, so this one would be that you are tall. So big T, little t is your genotype. The fact that you are tall is your phenotype. Okay, so let's go ahead and practice this a little bit. Move it up a little. Okay, we're going to learn two more words and then we're going to practice. So another word is heterozygous. Now, if you see this word zygous, this ending, that's because it's talking about zygotes, which we learned in our last week's lesson, which means that it is a fertilized egg. So the reason why they came up with this is because the fertilized egg, which ends up being the actual living organism, is either going to have the same letters or different. So hetero means different, okay, meaning different letters. Okay, so not different letters, but different like sizes. So a big T, little t would be heterozygous, where homozygous, again with that root, okay, homozygous means the same. Homo means the same. Okay, so they would either be big T, meaning that they're the same as in both tall, or little t, which means that they are both short, or the recessive trait for height. Okay, so we're going to practice this real quick. Sorry, I'm moving my camera around a lot. Okay, so we can learn genotype is the letters, phenotype is the physical trait, hetero means different, homo means the same. So we're going to go through and practice this. So I'm going to make a little chart, and you guys will find in the practice, you guys are going to do this again online. So we're going to practice this. So remember that big T means tall, little t means short. So we're going to have big T, big T, big T, little t, and then little t, little t. So again, those letters, okay, those letters are what we would call our genotype, okay, which would be coming from our alleles, okay. Then we're going to be naming it, and then we're going to have our phenotype, meaning what the physical trait looks like. So we're going to go through this one real quick. So big T, they're the same. So that would be a homozygous, and since at least there's one capital, anytime there's at least one capital, it's going to be dominant. It's going to overpower. So it's a homozygous dominant, and the person is going to be tall. Okay? Now for this one, we have one big and one little, so that's different. So that's heterozygous. And then since there's at least one tall letter, that is also dominant. Okay, and that person will also be tall because there's at least one capital. Now this one is lowercase t, lowercase t. Those are the same, so it is homozygous again. And it's not dominant because it does not have any capital letters, so this one would be homozygous recessive. Okay, and since that's recessive, it's going to be short. Now, a lot of kids always say, well, what about heterozygous recessive? The fact of the matter is, you cannot have a heterozygous recessive because if it's heterozygous, it has to have one of each because they're different. So it would still be dominant because it's going to overpower. So there's no such thing, okay, as heterozygous recessive. No such thing. Not possible. Okay, not possible. And then we need to make sure that while we're working through this, if you're not understanding it, make sure you YouTube it, or make sure you're looking at your digital lesson or messaging me so I can help you. But this is the difference between genotype and phenotype, heterozygous and homozygous, and then dominant and recessive. So this is the main section of lesson 4. So we're going to get into a little bit more details, and we're going to practice, and then we're going to do Punnett squares, so figuring out what the probability is of if a parent has a dominant trait or a recessive trait, what are the chances that the offspring will have the dominant or recessive trait. So we're going to have a lot of different examples. I'll use a lot of human examples, but I'll also be using some animal examples. So in the next few parts of these notes, I would make sure that you guys have maybe some colored pencils or markers or something to color with. I know a lot of you guys have those colorful pens. That would be perfect. So make sure you guys are walking through it. Maybe when I say let's try it, pause the video and see if you can do it yourself. And then check and watch what I'm doing. All right, so I will see you in part 2.